My dear children, young friends and parents, I consider it as a privilege to share a few thoughts about servant of God Archbishop Gurudhvani Mar Ivanios. I thank Reverend Father Soju for giving me this opportunity to discuss a topic so important during the lifetime of servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios and even today. Reverend Father Soju asked me to discuss the vision of the church according to servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios. Many of us may think that the context of the reunion of servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios with the universal church and the context of the church today are different. Apparently, they are different. But if we make an analysis, for example, the relation between the Indian Orthodox Church and the Jacobite Syrian Church, the situation remains the same. Both churches are still after court cases and litigations. And several churches used by the Jacobite faithful till recently are closed and no services are allowed to the Jacobite faithful. I do not intend to delve deeply into this matter. Servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios decided to reunite with the universal church and be with the successor of Peter, knowing well that it is the only way to bring peace in the Malankara church, which was divided into various groups. I quote the words of Jesus Christ regarding the ministry of Saint Peter. Peter, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verse 32. Servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios realized that only when the divided churches and Christian factions join and return to the universal church and remain with the See of Peter or the See of Rome, the faithful can experience peace and joy. How servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios returned to the communion with the See of Peter and the universal church. I would like to mention two events from the life of servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios. These events are mentioned in the biography of servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios written by Reverend Father Thomas in Jakalodi. I hope you know that servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios took a group of young people, men and ladies, to Serampore, West Bengal for higher studies. He only paid their fees and met other expenses of them from his salary as professor. He wanted to prepare a generation away from the troubles in the Malankara church in Kerala. He used to take them classes on faith, history and morals. During one of the classes, a student asked servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios a question. Can you say that the Orthodox Church is the one instituted by Jesus Christ? He said, no. The student asked servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios again, can you say that the Catholic Church is the true church instituted by Jesus Christ? Servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios answered the person, I need to study more in order to give you an answer. History proved that he continued his study and finally entered into the Catholic communion. The second instance was a discussion between a lay person and a deacon narrated in the above mentioned biography of servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios. The lay person was extolling the beauty of the Antiochian liturgy. The deacon, on the other hand, was praising the beauty of the Catholic Church, pointing out the discipline and several other good aspects of the Catholic Church. Often, the deacon was in a defensive mood. Servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, has been listening this conversation between the two from a nearby room. He came out of his room and said, what the lay person said was correct. The Antiochian liturgy is beautiful. But servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios continued and asked the lay person, why can't we think of having this liturgy or taking this liturgy into the beautiful church? For that question, the lay person has no answer. Listening, answering questions, and continuous studies led him to the true church, one true church instituted by Jesus Christ, the Holy Catholic Church. Servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, wanted the whole Orthodox Church to enter into communion with the Catholic Church and the See of Peter. And the Synod of the Orthodox Church, convoked at Paramala, took the decision to enter into communion with the Universal Church and the See of Peter. But after some time, the Orthodox Church leadership withdrew from the decision to enter into Catholic communion owing to a court verdict in favor of the Orthodox Church. The case was over the ownership of the money put in interest. Indirectly, the court verdict was a recognition of the identity of the Orthodox Church and the power of the Orthodox Church. Servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, was not prepared to withdraw from his decision, since he has realized that the Catholic Church is the true church, and what divided the Indian Church is their greed for money and power. Servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, along with Bishop Mar Theophilus, Father John, Deacon Seraphion, and Mr. Kidileth Chaco, entered the communion of the Universal Church on 20th September 1930. On June 11th, 1932, a hierarchy was established for the Syro-Malagra Catholic Church. Thousands of faithful, priests, and religious entered into the Catholic communion. Now the Syro-Malagra Catholic Church has 12 dioceses, flourishing communities in the Gulf region, United Kingdom, Germany, and Oceania. And there are mission centers in the continent of Africa and North India. As desired and requested by servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, the Syro-Malagra Catholic Church has now all India jurisdiction. On 10th February 2005, His Holiness Pope John Paul II raised the Syro-Malankara Church to the status of a major archiepiscopal church and appointed the then Metropolitan Archbishop, Most Reverend Cyril Mar Ivanios, as the major Archbishop of the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church. This was the crowning event of all the ecclesial communion endeavors since 1653. The Church has obtained a synodal structure with the major Archbishop as the father and head of the Church. He can exercise patriarchal powers with the Synod of Bishops. Following the Syro-Antiochian tradition, the major Archbishop is the Catholicos of the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church. Another major event in the history of the Church was the appointment of the second major Archbishop Catholicos of the Church, Moranmor Basilios Klimis, as Cardinal. Pope Benedict XVI created him a Cardinal on 24th October 2012, and he took part in the conclave for the election of the 265th Pope, Pope Francis, in 2013. What was the vision of servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, on the Church? He wanted the Church to be in communion with the universal Church. The Antiochian liturgy, tradition and spirituality should be maintained without any change. The divided Christian churches in Kerala should enter into communion with the universal Church and the See of Rome. The gospel shall be preached to the whole world. Even in the initial days of the reunion movement, servant of God Archbishop Mar Ivanios has started mission centers among the southern part of Kerala and in Tamil Nadu and among tribals. The good news and the joy of the gospel shall be shared with all. No caste or cultural criterion shall be a barrier for their entering into the Catholic Church. And God has blessed the Syro-Malankara Church with committed bishops, priests, religious, and faithful for this mission. Let us all pray and work so that the dream of servant of God, Archbishop Mar Ivanios, shall be fulfilled, that they all shall become one under one shepherd and sheepfold. May God bless you all. Thank you.